really happy to be with you all. And I'm really happy to be talking about how to crush your interviews. And so you can see right here behind me, this is the book that today's talk is based on. This is the cover. Here we go. We've got a lot to do today. I'm gonna talk pretty fast. I'm just gonna work all the way through everything I have to say. This is an interactive session, so there are times where I'm actually gonna ask you to talk back to me in the chat box and to stay with me. We're gonna do a few exercises, and I'll take all of your questions at the end. So don't put your questions in the chat box now. Put them all in at the end so that they don't get lost in the participation as we go. Okay. And for now, I'm going to turn off my camera so that you can focus on my wonderful slides. Okay. All right. So here we go. So this is me. Many of you have seen me present before, but for those of you who are new to what I've got going on here, this is kind of the bullet list of my identity. These are the jobs that I've held, the passions that I've had, the subjects that I've studied, and the roles that have defined me, so to speak. The most relevant ones for our discussion today are highlighted, possibly the most important ones being the fact that I used to recruit MBAs from all of the top business schools when I worked at BCG. So part of my job at BCG was to help more diverse candidates succeed in making through our difficult interview process. And in fact, the workshop I'm leading today had its origins back in those days when I was working for BCG, and I would go around to all the top business schools and talk about storytelling. Those ideas came from my career as a failed screenwriter. And for the last 12 years or so, I've really been focused on sharing all of these lessons, primarily with MBAs through career coaching and MBA admissions coaching. But all of this comes together to, how this all makes sense. Separately, maybe these things don't make sense, but if you put it all together, I'm a student of human nature. And that's really the basis of everything that I do, including everything that we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so we did the poll. If you didn't do the poll before, just quickly head over to the Zoom window, to the Pathable window and answer the poll so that I have a complete sense of who all is here. Just useful for me to know if I'm mostly talking to people looking at MBA interviews or recruiting interviews. There's a difference. And while you're polling in your responses, I want to let you all know some really exciting news. So this is the book that I'm talking about today. It came out a while ago, but it's a #1 bestseller right now. Okay. So if you go to Amazon, this is the #1 bestseller on job interviews. And you may notice that the price for the Kindle is less than $1. This price lasts until tomorrow. So if you all want more after this conversation, I recommend you go grab this book and grab it today because the price goes up tomorrow, back to $10. And then you have to pay 10 times that price. So be sure to check it out. I'll talk about it again at the end. I'm also #1 in business school guide. So those of you who are applying to business school, this is also really relevant to that. So here are our goals today: to explore a new framework for storytelling that will allow you to talk about yourself with both confidence and humility, and to give you a path forward to storytelling awesomeness. What we're going to do today is really just going to scratch the surface. It's really just going to whet your curiosity. It's going to give you one meaningful, concrete tool that I hope you will use extensively in your interviews, but there's still a lot of other stuff to deal with. So I'll talk at the end about ways you can carry this lesson forward. So let's get right to it. We're going to talk about a new framework for storytelling. And as I always like to start every session with, to remind you all, we're all human. So we have to work with our human nature. Storytelling is the most ancient and basic human art form. It was for the very purpose of telling stories that language came about in the first place. So learning how to tell brilliant stories is not only your birthright, it's going to potentially be the most valuable skill you will have in your entire career, because all influence, all human connection, all success begins with communication, and the majority of powerful communication as human beings is storytelling. So the skill for today goes way beyond interviews in terms of its significance, and I hope you're going to get a lot out of this session. All right, so you're about to talk about yourself. You all have an interview in your future. Maybe it's in the next 2 weeks if you're applying to business school. Maybe it's in February if you're interviewing for internships. Maybe it's tomorrow if you're full-time recruiting, and if you're having an interview as part of this conference, you are going to talk about yourself. And I love this picture because I think it kind of captures how we all feel. You know, you're not super terrified. I mean, maybe you are. I certainly was from time to time when I was interviewing with consulting firms during my own MBA. But at the very least, you know, you're like a little bit nervous probably. So let me check in with all of you. And this is a moment to type into the chat box your response to this question. What are your concerns when you're talking about yourself? What are the things you're worried about? You're facing an interview. What are your concerns going into your interviews? Go ahead and type in the chat box. No wrong answers. Just let me know what you think. All right, talking too fast, not making enough clear points, getting tongue-tied, the concern that my story doesn't sound as strong as I think it should, not being engaging. All right, not getting my authentic self across, very good. Sounding overly confident, being arrogant, not knowing the topic, failing to make eye contact, that's a good one. Yeah, coming off as arrogant or underwhelming. So usually what happens in this moment is that we have answers on two sides of a dichotomy. On the one hand, we're worried about coming off as arrogant. And that is a very legitimate concern because the majority of interviews are asking you to talk about success. So you're naturally going to be highlighting your strengths and your successes. And we're always afraid of seeming arrogant when we talk about those things. Then on the flip side of this is the concern of not seeming good enough, competent enough, accomplished enough, authentic enough, whatever are the concerns that you have about how the interviewer might judge you to be inadequate, right? We're kind of caught, if you think about it, we're really caught between a rock and a hard place here, right? Like you can't come off as too arrogant, but you also can't come off as incompetent or unaccomplished, because then that ruins the whole point of the interview. So it's really kind of absurd, the position that we find ourselves in an interview. There are a lot of people who say that they would rather, they would rather public speak than have an interview. And you know that you probably heard that public speaking is, the number one fear of people, even greater than the fear of death. So it's a difficult conversation when you're about to go in and be judged all based on talking about yourself. We're in a tough spot. So the goal here really is to be confident, because if you're not confident, then you're not going to build trust in your abilities. You're not going to build affinity for who you are, and you're not going to be able to make a connection if you're not confident. If you're worried about not looking good or not having the answer, if you're having some kind of internal debate with yourself, you're not going to be able to be fully present with the interviewer and create that human connection. This is multiplied when we're on video. It's even harder on video than it is in person. But at the same time, you don't want to seem arrogant and you don't want to seem completely full of yourself. So how do we strike the balance between these two things? And for those of you who attended my session last week, you know how important these softer human components are. Your emotions, and more importantly, the emotions of the of the interviewer are going to drive the decision at this point more than your qualifications. Because if you're in the interview room, you're already qualified enough. Companies and business schools do not waste their money interviewing people that they would never possibly admit or hire. They're only talking to the people who are qualified. So who's going to make it through the final gauntlet? It's not the people who are the most qualified, because you're already part of that middle band. It's the people who are the most likable, who engender connection and trust. The people that the interviewers want to have on their team. Hold on just one second. Inconveniently timed tickle in my throat. Let's hope that doesn't come back. Okay. So what we really want here is confident humility. You want to come across as both confident and humble. And in most of our thinking, these two things are on the opposite side of a coin. They can't coexist. Well, today we're going to talk about how you can make them coexist in your own experience and in the way you talk about yourself, and enable you, more importantly, you've seen this slide 10 times already if you've been in any of my webinars, create a genuine human connection. Your goal in the interview is to connect with the other person like a human being, so that they come out of the room, out of the interview room, ready to go fight for you because they feel like they know you, they feel like they want you on their team, they feel like you're already a friend. You're the person they're going to go to bat for. That can only happen. It doesn't happen. It's not a mental exercise. They're not doing it because they're running some algorithm in their head about your qualifications and the quality of your answers and deciding that you're the best. No, they're doing it because you made them feel good. You made them feel connected and inspired and like they know you. So this is our goal. And we're going to do it by telling stories. All right. So before we get into my storytelling framework, I always have to pay homage to my storytelling gurus. This is my storytelling guru number one, Joseph Campbell. And if you don't know who this guy is, he spent the entire 5 years of the Depression reading books. He was more than just a super nerd. He's also the person who discovered / invented the hero's journey. So you've probably heard of the hero's journey. It's very much a part of common parlance these days. But this is what he discovered in 5 years of reading 9 hours every day, the history of the entire human lexicon of literary creation. He read biographies, he read fiction, he read mythology, etc. He really completely immersed himself in everything that we humans had to say up until that point. And this is what he discovered, that there's really a hidden pattern to most stories. And it looks like this. It's a journey. There's a character who's going through challenges to achieve atonement and become a hero, not just in the protagonist sense of the word, but in the sense of valor and courage and achievement. So we're going to work with this today, and I'm going to make it really easy for you to apply this to your own life and your own stories. So we always want to start with the hero, the protagonist, the main character. This is a character I really like to work with because I used to use Michael Corleone from The Godfather, but as the years passed, the audience didn't know who he was anymore. So I know you guys all know who this is. Who's this? Type in the chat box. Tell me if you recognize this character. Okay, we have some wrong answers and some right answers. So Nemo Corleone. Nice one, Brian. Nice. Okay, so it's not Nemo, actually. It's Marlin. Really importantly, the hero of Finding Nemo isn't Nemo. It's Marlin. And if you think about it, immediately, if you've seen the movie and you hear me say that, it's immediately clear, right? It's immediately clear that Marlin is the hero, not Nemo, because Marlin is the one who really goes on the journey. All right, so how do we get to know a character in a story? If you've ever seen a movie, the answer to this question is immediately clear. It's so clear, I'm not even going to ask you all for an answer. But I'll just demonstrate it for you. When you saw Finding Nemo, it wasn't like this. You know, there wasn't a narrator who came on and said, Marlin, he was a kind fish. He was fatherly, a little bit uptight, pretty strict on his son, really afraid that something was going to go wrong. But, you know, ultimately he loved his son, right? This doesn't happen in a movie, and it doesn't even really happen in a novel because it's boring. It's also not credible. As human beings, we don't like to be told what to think. We like to form our own opinions. Part of the reason that film and television have sort of replaced everyone's consumption of media, that's an overstatement, but directionally correct, is because film and TV really embody this lesson so effectively, which is that you want to tell the story through actions and not opinions. So if I ask you, what kind of a leader are you? And you say something like this, well, I'm a very savvy communicator and I can overcome conflict with my teams. That's not going to be a great answer, right? It's not a great answer because it's your opinion. Savvy communicator and capabilities, that's just your opinion about yourself. And you are not a credible authority on who you are, because obviously there's a conflict of interest. You're going to tell me the great stuff about you. You're not going to tell me the real shiz. You're going to put a sheen on it. So I'm inherently going to resist accepting that as the truth, as the listener. This is just human nature. It's automatic. Instead, if you give me an example of your actions, I always try to sit down with each member of my team and understand their personal objectives on the project. You see how this is showing me who you are as opposed to telling me who you are. It's giving me an action as opposed to an opinion. Now, you all already know this. I have no doubt that you've heard what I'm saying here, and you've potentially already incorporated this into your daily life, into your interview preparation. You know that it's better to illustrate who you are in terms of actions rather than opinions. But this is just the first step. So let's keep going. And we're actually going to build a story right now together. So, and we're going to tell a success story. So what a story is something very specific. The word storytelling and the word story is thrown around a lot today to mean a lot of different things. It would be very useful for you if you're able to differentiate when people are really talking about stories in the narrative purist sense versus when they're using the word story to mean answer, elevator pitch, excuse, stuff you say about yourself. They're just like a lot of things are lumped under the word story now that don't necessarily belong there. We're really talking about the purest literary definition of a story. It has very specific rules. So it's not just any old thing you're saying. It's something very specific. As listeners, we have a very specific reaction to it, which is basically we can't stop listening. I mean, this is the whole reason that television, have you noticed that when a show ends, and I guess we don't really have commercials that much anymore, but in the old days when there were still commercials, what they do is they start the next show and they show you like a 60-second teaser of the next show before they go to the commercial break, because they know that once you've seen even just 1 minute of the next story, you cannot get up and walk away until the narrative is resolved. This is the great thing about stories, is that it rivets our attention and we cannot help it. It's really like a drug. And then finally, stories always connect with our emotions. If you're talking about yourself in a way that does not presence emotionality in yourself and the listener, you're not telling a story, you're doing something else. So let's talk about how to do this. And by the way, you already know how, okay? So you already do this. Like I said, storytelling is your birthright. You may not do it as optimally as possible in your job interviews, but you already know how to tell a story. So if you ever started a discourse by saying, "You will never believe what my boss did today," that was a story. You were telling a story, you were launching into a story, and what came next was a story. So you actually already know how to do this. So what we're going to do is reveal to you the hidden pattern that you're already kind of using so that you can bring it out when you really need it. So what I want you to do is pick an accomplishment. And you're coming up on interviews sometime in the next year, most of you, probably much sooner than that. So, this is a good chance to start preparing for that interview. So pick an accomplishment that you want to work with today for the next 30 minutes or so. And it can really be anything. You can pick, a time you led a team in preparation for a particular kind of interview. You can pick an accomplishment that shows something you're proud of, your greatest personal victory. It can be professional, it can be personal, doesn't really matter. But just pick an accomplishment that you're going to work with here for the next 30 minutes. And I'm not going to make you all recite your answers out loud. So don't be nervous or don't be nervous about that. But you do want to have an example to work with, because the rest of this won't be meaningful if you're not applying it. So does everybody have something to work with? Does anybody not have an accomplishment? I'm just going to stop here for a second to make sure that you all can get with me here. Give me some sign of life if you have or don't have an achievement to work with. Okay. At least some of you are ready to go. Perfect. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Okay. Fantastic. Okay, so let's work with it. So the storytelling rule number 1 is, these are my rules from the book. So all stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You already knew this, right? In fact, for something to be a story, by definition, it has to have an ending. Doesn't have an ending, it's not a story yet. So we're going to start with the beginning of your story. So take that accomplishment that you are working with, and you might want to even jot down some notes here. Think about the beginning of the story. What were the circumstances? What was the task in front of you? Who else was there? When was it? Where were you? Notice the who, what, when, where. Okay, so these are like the reporter W words. You want to make this quite concrete. Okay, so just take a moment and jot down. Where were you? What was happening? Who else was there? What was your task? And you want to think about storytelling rule number 2 while you're doing this, which is that stories happen in space and time. 2 experiences that we all share as human beings are space and time. We're all bound by space, and we're all, very unfortunately, bound by time. So the way I know you're telling me a story is because you use place and time terminology. The other day I was at work when, you see, you're already listening to what I'm saying because you know that I'm telling a story because I gave you a time and a place. All right, so just think about the beginning of your story. Here's an example from my own life. It was my first consulting project, and I had to make the contract that would dictate the post-merger integration of 2 consumer goods companies. Just like a really simple setup. You know where I was. I mean, you don't know geographically where, but you know I was in my consulting firm. It was the very beginning of my career. I could have added, it was Chicago, 2004, my first project at BCG. That would make it even more riveting, right? So just think about the background and the beginning of the story. That's the first step and usually the easiest part of the process. Now, and we're going to call this context. So I'm building out a framework for you all that you can carry forward. And this is the first piece of it. It's called context. So now let's think about the end of the story. So now you want to think about the outcome. So what result did you produce? This is a success story. So something must have changed. There must have been some outcome in the world where things were different after than they were before. So what result did you produce? What impact did you have? What's the happy ending? What did you learn? Okay, these are all parts of the outcome. If there are any numbers, dollars associated with your impact, you want to be sure to include them. So telling a story has only a little bit in common with a resume bullet, but if the resume bullet conveys dollars or time, if there are numbers, measures associated with the result, that's part of the story. So you're going to want to be sure to include that here, right? So I'll just give you a moment to remind yourself of all the dimensions of the outcome. Okay. Oh yeah, and how did you grow as a result? That's kind of like what you learned. All right, so here's the ending of my story. The contract was a success. The merger went off without a hitch, garnering praise from the CEO, and I learned a lot about client management. All right, so that's the ending of my story, and hopefully you've got a sense of the ending of your story. So we're going to call this change. This is the end of the story, and I call this change because in every story, something must change. That's how we know time has passed. And more importantly, the hero also must change. This is part of every story as well. In fact, we could say that storytelling is really just the cataloging, the chronologing. I'm looking for a word that's not coming to me. The cataloging of a journey of change on one or more specific dimensions for a person. That's really what a story is. Okay, so that's the ending of the story. And again, we're going to call that change. So now you want to think about the middle of the story. And remember, we said that actions are really how you want to convey your experiences. So if you've ever worked with any other storytelling frameworks, actions are front and center, right? Actions are a very important part of this. This is the middle of the story. So go ahead and take a moment and think about what were the actions that you did to get yourself to that result? What were all the steps you took from the initial part of the, there you were in the beginning, and then there you were in the end, and what came in between? I could give you probably 5 minutes on this and you wouldn't think of everything, but let's go ahead and keep going. So here is my story told kind of through this lens. I already told you at the beginning. It was my first consulting project, and I had to manage the contract that would dictate the post-merger integration of two consumer goods companies. I built a big spreadsheet, managed a team of very senior professionals through the process of inventorying all their business practices and processes, and then we turned it into a giant legal contract for the seller. And in the end, the contract was a success. The merger went off without a hitch, garnering praise from the CEO, and I learned a lot about client management. So this is a really truncated version of the story. I told it in almost even less than a minute, so it's way shorter than it would need to be in an actual interview. But here's a question. How do you feel about me? Okay, if this is the story I'm telling you, let's say you ask me, tell me about an achievement, and I give you this answer, how do you feel about me as a person? Type in the chat box. Shayla, don't worry about the STAR framework. You'll never use it again after this. Okay. Yeah, really good, you guys. You're indifferent. You're saying everything went perfect. Seems unrealistic. Seems shallow. To the point, yeah, okay, but it's dry. It's vague. Okay, very good. It is succinct, too succinct. So the thing you want to check in, so some of you are telling me your judgments. Some of you are telling me your opinions, which is perfectly fine. But the thing you want to notice is your feeling about me as a person. Because you understand that your interviewer is not robotically analyzing the content of your answer and forming an opinion about your answer. They're forming a feeling about you as a person. This is a much bigger conclusion than just how well did you execute the answer. What I just said might have blown some of your minds. If it did, allow it to blow your mind. The interviewer is not judging or opining on the content of your responses. They are forming a decision about how they feel about you as a person. And so some of you answered that question. You said, I feel like you're a little bit arrogant, or I'm indifferent to you. That was the best answer. I mean, the most kind. It's that I'm indifferent to you. And then some of you said, okay, you seem arrogant. You seem like you're hiding something. There's something unrealistic here. It's shallow. Okay. Very, very good. So here's my definition of arrogance. Okay. So I'm a big Simpsons fan. Hopefully you all saw this hilarious episode. Look, so the appearance of arrogance is actually a lack of self-honesty. So when someone comes across to us as arrogant, the problem we have with that is that we know they're not telling the whole story, because life is not easy. It's not easy for any of us. This is the human condition, right? Human life is pretty freaking hard, even for those of us who have privileged existences. It's not easy to grow as a person and to change and to deal with ambiguity and to deal with the world as it is. So if you're leaving out the part of the story where you struggled, you're going to come off as arrogant because no one is buying it. It seems like you are hiding something or you're lying. So there's something really important missing from our framework here. Let's see if you can tell me what it is. So let's remember our good buddy Marlon. And for those of you who've seen the movie, there's going to be some spoilers here. I hope I hope you've all seen it. The thing about great characters is that they are flawed and they face challenges. And by the way, that is especially true of heroes. If you've ever seen a Hollywood movie, you know that the movies you love the most are the ones where the characters are the most human, which means they are the most flawed and they face the most challenges. All right, so what's missing? It's conflict. Conflict is actually what creates a story. So let's go back to Marlon. It creates the story and it's what defines it. This is storytelling rule number 3. So if we go back to our friend Marlon, right? You remember what happened. So there's the diver who's taking a photo of Nemo, and then he captures Nemo in that plastic bag. Now imagine that Nemo had discovered a hole in the bottom of the bag, and then he swam to safety. You see that we don't have a story if that happened, right? It's just something a little bit scary, a little bit interesting that happened to Nemo one day. It's not a story. What makes this a story is that, first of all, Marlin tried to chase the boat, right? So Nemo is taken onto this boat. Marlin tries to chase the boat, but he loses it. This very sad moment in the movie, right? He's lost. Then he gets back on the trail. And in the process of trying to recover his son, he has to face sharks, anglerfish, jellies, the whale, right? What made this movie so meaningful for all of us and so memorable is the scale and extent of the conflict that Marlin had to face to get his son back. And importantly, he was a scaredy cat before all this happened. He didn't want to leave the anemone, but he had to cross the whole ocean and deal with all of these predators in order to get his son back. That's what makes him a hero. That's what makes this a great story. And that's what makes this movie so endearing to all of us. Okay, so what is conflict? Because you're going to need to add conflict to your stories. Conflict, this is years of screenwriting study here, you guys, rolled into one sentence. It took me years to really figure this out, even though I'm sure I read something like this many times. Conflict happens when the protagonist wants something and has to overcome obstacles to get it. That's it. And if you think about it, this is really the human condition. You want something, but there's something in the way. Either it's time, it's money, it's ability, it's physical distance. It might even be yourself. There's something in the way of what you want. This is the third thing that we all share in the human condition. So let's define the conflict in your story. Okay, so look at that achievement. Think about, what was your objective? What did you want in that situation? And then what obstacles did you overcome to accomplish that outcome? Take a moment right now and think about your achievement and take notes on these questions. This is the money moment right here. This is where you go from a boring flat star answer to a brilliantly told story. Okay. And then what was challenging about the situation? So all of this. The core of every story is a single sentence. It's what I call the conflict sentence. And it's as simple as this. I wanted X, but I had to overcome Y. So you want to be able to define this for the story you're about to tell about this achievement that you're looking at right here. And the more refined and specific you can be, the more powerful the story will be. So let me ask you all to just use this framework right now and try to define the conflict sentence of that achievement that you're working on. And type it in the chat box if you would. I want to see how close we're getting here. Just want to hear one or two examples. Make sure that you guys are with me. Okay, I wanted to make my workplace more accepting, but I had to overcome systemic white male privilege. Okay, good. Now, I really thank you for sharing that, the person who shared that. Can I coach you for a minute? Give me a yes or a no if you're willing to have me work with you. Okay. So, so systemic white male privilege is not a real thing. In other words, you can't put that on a movie screen because it's a concept. So drill down to the reality of that situation. What exactly, and you want to think about this in terms of time and space. In terms of time and space, what was standing in your way of making the workplace more accepting? Just type in the chat box, whatever comes to mind. Leaders who wouldn't take my meetings or not meeting with me. Very good. Okay. I suspected that the root villain in this story was like one or two guys. Am I right? It was like one or two guys who refused to listen to you. Exactly. Okay. So very frequently in our minds, we're up against something huge, like a system or an entire history of oppression of ideas. And not that any of that is invalid. It's just not the real thing that you are confronting. So you want to get really, really specific. Whenever you look at a challenge where it looks like you're fighting a whole organization, if you think about the practicalities of your day-to-day life in those days, it will usually come down to one or maybe two people. It's like one or two guys that's really stubborn and they don't want to change, or they don't want to listen to you, or they have other things they're doing, whatever they have that's going on with them. But very frequently, the conflict that we're experiencing is between us and one or two other people. So the gatekeepers, as you're saying here. So very, very good. So it's very valuable to drill down to the on the ground, in the room, physical reality of what you were up against. In some cases, and we had another example here. Here was one. I wanted to join the actors union, but I had to overcome the narrative that others had built in my head about who I was as a performer. So this is where the enemy is you and your view of yourself. I wanted to join the actors union, but I had to overcome the narrative in my own head about who I was as a performer. So you see, sometimes the obstacle is you. In fact, frequently the obstacle is you and your view of yourself. Sometimes it's one other person, two other people, and then other times it is something much bigger. It's like time or a computer system or a language barrier. Sometimes it is something that's more like nature, like fighting a bear or traffic. Okay, so but the important thing here is to really define this clearly. The more clearly you define this, the more effortlessly the story will flow. And you're probably never going to say this out loud, by the way. This is not actually part of the telling of the story. It's just part of your understanding of the story, which will allow you to tell it with much greater power. Okay, so here's mine. I wanted to impress my teammates. And if I'm honest, that was the number one motivation. And the number two motivation was to do a good job for the client. Yeah, I did want to do that. But the main thing was I really wanted to impress my teammates. I'm being very honest about that. But I had to overcome a compressed timeline, an unmotivated client, and my own complete inexperience. So here you see we have all three levels of conflict. We've got nature, man, and myself. Okay, so I was really up against it on this one. Okay, now once you've identified the core conflict, think about what are the specific choices you made and the actions that helped you overcome the conflict. So the problem with all the other interview frameworks that you may have worked with is that they don't differentiate which actions matter. And on a project that lasted 6 months, there was a veritable infinity of actions that I took on that project. So how do I know which ones are important? Here's the answer. The ones that really move the needle on helping you overcome the conflict. Those are the ones that really matter. So now you want to think about, how did you think and feel about those challenges? How did you strategize to overcome them? And what actions did you take? So take a moment right now and think about this as it pertains to your story. All right. So storytelling rule number 4, choices define the character. This is how we get to know what you're made of and who you really are. It's by the choices that you make when you are confronted with an obstacle to what you want. All right, so now I'm going to put it all together. I'm going to give you my example completed, told with the 4 C's and not with the earlier arrogant model. Okay, so here we go. It was my first consulting project, and I had to make the contract that would dictate the post-merger integration of 2 consumer goods companies. The timeline was really tight. I had no idea what I was doing. It was literally my first project. And much more importantly, my client counterpart, whose name was Lenny, failed to keep order at meetings. And the process really started to fall apart when other team members challenged his authority. You know, and I was just a kid. I was just a freshly minted MBA that had no business experience. So I knew that the team wasn't going to listen to me because they were all 20 or 30 years my senior. I decided that to succeed, I would first have to bolster Lenny's ability to own the process. So I held pep talks before meetings. I prepped him on the deck that he would be presenting every week. And I would ask him questions that I knew the group would pose. And in particular, some of the more antagonistic team members who really had it in for Lenny. And then one day we were in a meeting, and Mike, I'll call him, was Lenny's primary antagonist. He just really had it in for Lenny. And so he stood up and he asked the question in a kind of snarky way. And Lenny had the most brilliant answer. Like, he knew what he was going to say. It was an answer that we had prepped for. He gave the answer, and Mike was sort of like stunned into silence. And this was a turning point. I'm not even kidding. It was really like a movie. From this point forward, the whole process was smooth sailing. We had to build a giant spreadsheet, which we then turned into a giant legal document. But once Lenny took ownership of the project, everything else after that was easy. And so in the end, the contract was a success, and the merger went off without a hitch, garnering praise from the CEO. I learned a lot about client management, but most importantly, Lenny got his first promotion in 10 years. And that's really the part of this project that I'm most proud of, is that I fostered his success. So you see how different this answer is from the other one. Notice how you feel about the person who's telling you this story. You feel like you know me. You feel like you understand how I think and what I value. You're getting a really clear glimpse into what's important to me. And my guess is that one of the thoughts you're having, about the person who's telling this story is, oh, this is someone I'd like to have on my team, right? We're building an emotional connection through the telling of this confidently humble story. This is what you want to go for in your interviews. Notice, I just want to call your attention to one cool thing I did there. You notice how I showed you that one meeting when Lenny kind of shot down Mike. That's what I call a vivid moment. When you're telling a story really the right way, there will likely be one moment that you really show the listener, just like you're in a movie. Like, you could actually picture that meeting. You could picture the table and everybody standing around, and you could picture it. So this is a bonus, and you want to show the moment of extreme conflict, because conflict is where you make hay in your stories, and the overcoming. So it's the conflict and the overcoming of the conflict. All right. So here's how to take this forward for yourself. Here's how to create a story step by step. Pick an accomplishment. Then reminisce about the details, the challenges, your own thoughts and feelings. Choose a conflict sentence, and this is really where you need to spend the most time. The better you refine your conflict sentence, and the closer you get to the absolute complete truth in that conflict sentence, the more powerful your story will be, and the easier it will be to tell it. Then practice a little using context, conflict, and choice, and change format for your story. Do not memorize. You want to just have like bullet point summaries of the waypoints of the story. Practice it. but don't memorize it. And then repeat this process, crafting a story matrix to answer each of the questions you expect to encounter. So this is something we create with our clients. This is your story matrix. So you take all your accomplishments down here, and then here are some of the core behavioral questions that tend to show up in MBA interviews or management consulting interviews or even Amazon interviews. Tell me about a leadership experience. Tell me about a time you persuaded someone. And you think about how are you going to construct a 4 C's story around each of your achievements, right? So here are some of my achievements, and then I think about what are the waypoints of the story. This is how you fully prepare for an interview with a company like McKinsey or BCG, where they're going to throw multiple behavioral questions at you, and you really need to be ready for anything. Okay, so that's it. We've explored a new framework for storytelling that will allow you to talk about yourself with confident humility. So now I want to give you a path forward to storytelling awesomeness, because we've really only just scratched the surface. I mean, we didn't even cover that much today, honestly. If this is what's needed to succeed in an interview or an MBA application, we really have just touched this little tiny corner right up here. All right, so here's some actions that you might want to take. If you have an interview in the near future, here's what we did. We covered behavioral questions. So this is like a typical script for a normal interview, either, like you're interviewing with Booth or Stanford, or you're interviewing with BCG or Bain or McKinsey or Goldman or Amazon or Apple. It's going to follow some kind of format like this. We covered one and only part, honestly. We only covered one question, which is tell me about an accomplishment. We didn't get into failure. We didn't get into setbacks. There's a whole range of other questions. But you see, we just began to scratch the surface here. So if you have an interview in your future, please just go buy the book. It's $1 right now. It's $1 for the next 12 hours. So what we just covered was like half of one chapter of the book. So go get the book if you have an interview in your future. I promise you will not regret it. All right. If you feel like you want even more tactical guidance than just reading a book, I have a course called the Interview Hero Training Program. And you can check this out at shop.careerprotocol.com. It's like right on the front page of the shop. So head on over there if you are interested in something a bit more guided. And then if you're applying to business school this year or next year, you should consider working with me and my team. We are really good. Oh, font fail. We're really good at helping our clients get what they want. These are the statistics of our clients from last year's class. 96% acceptance rate. Most people got some kind of scholarship, averaging $60,000 in scholarships per person. If you do the math here, this is really astonishing. The reason for all these successes is because of the power of the stories that they tell. We're teaching storytelling as we work with our clients. We don't work with a lot of people. We're a small team, so we hand select a few people, and then we invest in their long-term success. So we're not just helping you put together the application. Those are kind of table stakes for the process. We're also engaging well beyond this into self-awareness and career game planning at the outset. Then we get into helping you choose schools, negotiate scholarships, and even prepare for MBA recruiting. This is our whole process. On this page, so we go through discovery and create a strengths profile based on you, your values, your dreams. Then we look at what will the AdCom believe, and we help you build a career game plan, do some research, practice for interviews, and then finally we come back to your dreams again at the end. And this is really just the career part of our process. This doesn't include all the resume building, recommender coaching, story shaping, and story training, interview hero training program, community. So working with us on your MBA applications is really a joyride. It's developmental, it's experiential, it's life-changing, and it's fun. So if you want to make the world a better place, we can help. You can apply to work with us right here. So if you want to see if there's a mutual fit with me and my team on your MBA applications, go to careerprotocol.com/MBA. And now we have 7 minutes left for questions. So what do you got? I am at your disposal until they kick us out of this room. Juan, if you want to contact us, you can go to careerprotocol.com/MBA and fill out the form. You can send me a message on LinkedIn. You can send an email to pretty much anything at careerprotocol.com, comes to me. A lot of different ways. Okay, what other questions do you have? Oh, a mistake I made in an interview and how I recovered. Okay, so I didn't get to tell you a lot of my personal story, but when I was applying for summer internships during my MBA, I only interviewed with 3 companies, Bain, BCG, and McKinsey. And I basically just underprepared for interviews. I really thought that because I wrote my resume, I knew what was in it and I was going to be ready to answer any question about it. And I was horribly mistaken. I made it to final round interviews, but the final round interviews were kind of an embarrassment. I lost my confidence and was like pretty sad by the end. I was really clear that I wasn't going to get an offer. So there wasn't really any recovering from that during the interview. I had to then regroup and really prepare myself for full-time interviews, which I did. And then I actually ended up with 2 offers, one at BCG and one at McKinsey. But that was a function of not preparing well enough. I know that isn't quite the answer that maybe you're looking for, but that's really the honest truth, is that under preparedness on your stories is something that you will kick yourself for forever. Okay. Do I have advice for professionals when it comes to asking for a raise or more responsibilities? Brian, you're right. That is a presentation on its own. It relates to having built strong relationships already, which is a whole different thing. We talked a little bit about it last week, but it's even much more beyond that. It's about effective upward management. And then the process of asking for more, you can leverage everything we talked about today. You can leverage storytelling. You can share stories in that conversation of conflicts that you've overcome, results that you produce that might not have happened anyway if you weren't the person leading them. And doing that is going to build your confidence to ask for more. And it's also going to create evidence without you coming off as defensive or arrogant. So try that. Really good question here on anxiety management. So what tips do you have for anxiety management? There's an entire chapter in the book on that. It relates to what you do the week before, the day before, during the interview, and after the interview. I really have like a complete system of how to manage anxiety. I'm a little bit prone to anxiety personally, and I especially can really just get into my head. Like I pretty much just live in my head at all times. And in an interview, if you get too much in your head, usually the dialogue that's happening up there is why you're not good enough and why you're failing. And when that happens, you tank, you can't perform. So I had to create a lot of different tools to, stop myself from doing that. And it's all in the book. And it's just go read that chapter in the book. It's called Managing Your Confidence Before, During, and After the Interview. All right, how much do you think you should include self-deprecation in your interview process? Should you only go there if they probe, or doing it on your own? Okay, so self-deprecation is falsehood, okay? Self-deprecation is false humility. It's teasing yourself, it's undermining yourself, it's pretending that you're not as good as you are. I never, ever, ever, ever recommend that you do that. I recommend instead that you show authentic humility, which means you recognize where you've faced challenges, where you face setbacks, even where you failed and made mistakes, but you do it without making yourself wrong. You do it because you understand that heroes only win and grow and succeed through failure. It's only possible to win after facing challenges. So showing that in a humble but also authentic and earnest way is really what you want to do. I don't recommend that you undermine yourself with self-deprecation. I would say to really prepare, how much time is required to prepare for a really great interview. I would say 10 hours at least, and potentially even more. It just really depends on the interview and the question types. I'm just going to keep talking as fast as I can. At some point, Zoom is going to kick us out, but I'll just keep going. And before we get kicked out, I just want to say this was awesome. Thank you all for having me. Thank you for participating. Like I said, this is my favorite conversation, and I really hope this was valuable for you all. All right, question for job interview. When in a loop with multiple interviews, should you try to hit different stories with each interviewer? Yes, you should hit different stories. They will compare notes. With a personal story about struggling, do I risk being perceived as a sob story? Only if you actually still feel sorry for yourself. So this is where emotion is really critical. I talk about this in the book extensively. If you're still making yourself wrong or holding something against yourself, you will come off as a sob story. If you can look back on it with a decent regret and move on and say, oh boy, I sure screwed that up. But you know what? Here's what I learned. If you can say it that way, then you will only be perceived as heroic, because we all know that heroes are not the people who are perfect. They're not the people who are strong in every moment. They're not the people who have no fear. They're the people who persist in the face of those things. All right, here's another question. How can I deliver my achievements without others feel that I'm bragging though? Well, that's what this whole session was about. I hope you watched it. If you didn't, go back and watch the recording. Would you also recommend the reference to the chapter if you get really nervous and forget what to say? Absolutely. The chapter on confidence is really awesome. Can you have access to the deck? No. Okay, I did it. I answered all of your questions. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Best of luck with your interviews. For those of you who want to take the journey forward, go buy the book and or drop us a line if you want to talk about your MBA applications. Really great to speak with you all. The recording will be posted in Pathable very soon. You'll be able to watch the recording right in there. So I think it will be there for quite some time. So take care, everybody. Thank you.